Hello everyone, it's David from Automotive Press. I have the all-new 2024 Toyota Grand Highlander, which is one of the most fascinating vehicles I drove this year. Why is that? Well, there are many three-row SUVs within the Toyota family, including the Toyota 4RUNNER, the regular Highlander, this Grand Highlander, and also the big Toyota Sequoia. But of all the SUVs I've driven within the Toyota family, this is the best three-row SUV. And I am actually pleasantly surprised by the performance, by the handling, the agility, and the overall practicality. This thing is a true winner, and if you're considering a three-row SUV within the Toyota or Lexus lineup, don't bother looking anywhere else. This is the one to buy. Even though this is a unitized body and not body-on-the-frame truck-based SUVs like the 4RUNNER or Sequoia, this is one of the best ones to buy because most of us don't need a true off-roader. We just really need a comfortable, roomy, and practical and affordable three-row SUV, and from that definition, this is the one you should get. Let me give you 12 reasons why this is the three-row SUV you should buy within Toyota Lexus lineup. Let's go. Welcome back. So do I really like this Grand Highlander? Well, you know what? If I were to buy another three-row SUV and it needs to be Toyota or Lexus model, this is the one I have to buy. This is the one I should buy. Because if you compare this to, let's say, 4RUNNER or the bigger Sequoia or even the regular Highlander, this one has the best balance of performance and value and practicality. So I really like this Grand Highlander, but let me give you 12 specific reasons why I really do think this is the best one to buy within the Toyota Lexus lineup, because those are the ones I want to compare with. And the first reason I'm going to tell you in terms of why this is one of the best SUVs out there is because this one is built like a Lexus. Why do I say that? Well, because the Grand Highlander is built in Princeton, Indiana, and for the first time, Princeton, Indiana factory will also build a Lexus model, which is a TX, and that's the counterpart to the Grand Highlander. And none of us have driven that TX yet. That's coming up a little bit later on, but it's going to be the more upgraded version of the Grand Highlander, yet they are built in the same factory, in the same line, and therefore they have to improve and upgrade the quality of the Grand Highlander to kind of a Lexus TX level. Maybe not quite the same, but pretty close, because they're sharing the platform and they're built in the same factory using the same method and the same processes. That's why I've noticed a huge improvement in terms of the gaps, alignment, the quality of the paint and so forth, compared to the regular Toyota Highlander, which is also built in Princeton, Indiana. But between the two, you know what? I have to say this one is quite a bit better, and this has reached a Lexus level. What do I mean by that? Well, just look at the gap here. It's only 3mm here, consistently 3mm, so 3mm here, 3mm here, and between the front fender and front door, 3.1, and here, there's a little gasket here, but I can tell it's a 3.2mm, and the back a little larger at 3.3mm, and even all the way here, it's actually pretty good. This is 3.3mm. And if you were to look at the normal Highlander, there's a huge gap over here, and all of the gaps between the panels are about 4mm. So you can tell that by measuring the actual gaps, that this one has come to pretty well close to what the Lexus models are, because most of the Lexus models are between 3 to 4mm, averaging about 3.5. So if this was a Lexus model, these measurements actually would have been acceptable because it is at a Lexus level. What about the actual quality of the metal pieces, which is the panel here? Well, you can tell from front all the way to the back, it's very consistent. It almost looks like it's made from a single sheet of metal, and all the creases line up. So once again, this is a type of quality that you only see in the Lexus models, and that's why I'm really impressed with it. The paint job is also really good. There's a little bit of orange peel as expected. That's often the case with Toyota models, but it's very consistent. Gloss is really good. I would suspect that maybe the Lexus TX model might have a thicker or additional clear coat, and therefore the paint quality might be a little bit different. But in terms of comparing this to other Toyota models, such as the 4RUNNER or Sequoia, or even to the regular Highlander, this is definitely top notch and one of the best quality that I've seen so far among all of the Toyota models. So really good quality, and that's one of the first reasons why I really like this Grand Highlander. The second thing I want to point out is that the Grand Highlander is actually not a stretched Highlander, and that's a really good thing. What do I mean by that? Well, actually this is almost all new from front to back. Yes, it does share the same TNGA platform underneath here, so the basic architecture and what we call the platform are similar between this and the Highlander, and obviously they also share some of the powertrain, but above the platform underneath, from here to the top, It's completely new. All the body panels are new. The design front and back is also different from Highlander, and also the interior is different. So for all intents and purposes, the Grand Highlander is a brand new model, not a stretched version of the Highlander. And the reason why that is important is because by redesigning and creating a whole new body, they would have had to re-engineer many other components inside the Grand Highlander. That includes the suspension pieces, for example. And that's why I noticed that the Grand Highlander is so much more luxurious and smoother and more refined than the normal Highlander, because all the suspension have been re-engineered and recreated specifically for the Grand Highlander. And also we have a unique powertrain choices, like this one here, which is a Platinum version, has a 2.4 liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine with a hybrid system called a Hybrid Max, and this is unique to the Grand Highlander and not offered on the regular Highlanders. So there are a number of very important differences between the Grand Highlander and the Highlander, and that makes this one a unique model, which is why I like it so much more than the Highlander. And I should know that because we owned a 2020 Toyota Highlander for 3 years, and we recently let it go because we traded in for the Lexus GX. And I did have a good experience with the Highlander, but there was also a lot of compromises with that model, which has been fixed by having the Grand Highlander, because this one is bigger, roomier, and so forth. It's also more luxurious. The third reason why the Grand Highlander is one of the best three-row SUV, and definitely the best one within the Toyota Lexus lineup, is because this one is just the perfect size. It's not too big, it's not too small, it's not too cumbersome like the truck-based SUVs. It's still small enough to be driven into underground parking, as well as be able to maneuver around city, but it's big enough and roomy enough that it can accommodate additional passenger in total comfort. So to be very specific, this Grand Highlander is actually 6 inches longer than normal Highlander. It is also 2 inches wider and 2 inches taller, so quite a bit larger than the Highlander. It's in fact basically a next category up in terms of a sizing. And even though there is a Toyota Sequoia above the Grand Highlander and Toyota 4RUNNER as a truck-based SUV, those ones aren't as practical in terms of interior spacing, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. So the Grand Highlander, in terms of the exterior sizing and especially the interior roominess, has a perfect size and a perfect balance in my opinion. The fourth reason why this particular Grand Highlander is advantageous compared to all the other three-row SUVs within the Toyota Lexus lineup is because this is definitely the most practical. You almost get like a minivan level of cargo space here. If you fold down all the seats, including the third row and the second row, you get 98 cubic feet. That's a huge amount of cargo space. But even with just the third seat folded down, you can tell how big it is. I can't even reach the back of the second seat here, and you get a pretty good height here as well. It's pretty well flat all the way through, and unlike the Sequoia, you don't get the huge bump over here, which is a real problem with that particular SUV. So we get a usable flat cargo space. It's also a very usable third row seat, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And this is something that you just don't get on the other three-row SUVs within the Toyota lineup. So this is one of the big advantages. So now I'm driving the Toyota Grand Highlander, and this brings me to the fifth point, which is also a bit of a controversial point, because we lost the V6 engine as they transitioned to the Grand Highlander, but also even the regular Highlander has lost the V6 engine to give away for the 2.4 liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. But in this particular Grand Highlander, which is a Platinum version, we have the 2.4 liter Turbo 4 with a hybrid, and it's called the Hybrid Max in Toyota's term. And I know many of you guys are wondering whether this engine is as good or better or different than the V6 engine that it had before. And surprisingly, I can tell you that now that I've driven this car for a number of days, I actually love this engine. It's a really peppy, torquey engine, and even though it's a little bit noisier than the V6 engine, it definitely performs better overall in terms of normal driving, daily driving, and even when you want to do a bit of aggressive driving. You step on the gas and it takes off with a power and torque that is never seen before. And more importantly, it's extremely smooth. I was a little bit worried about this engine when I drove it in the Toyota Crown and also in the NX from Lexus, because I just felt that it wasn't quite the right feel in those vehicles. But in this particular Grand Highlander, for whatever reason, they've done a perfect job. Maybe because they had more chance to calibrate this or to change the engineering spec a little bit. But in this Grand Highlander, this Turbo 4 hybrid is absolutely a blast. It's fun to drive, it's great feel on the road, and if it wasn't for a little bit louder engine noise, you wouldn't know that you're driving a 4-cylinder engine. I'm really glad that Toyota was able to perfect the application of this Turbo 4 in the Grand Highlander, because this is such an important engine for Toyota and Lexus lineup, as it will continue to become the most important engine in Toyota's lineup. So if you're simply looking for better performance in terms of power and torque and a really peppy acceleration, this engine actually is pretty good. Which brings me to the sixth point about the Grand Highlander in terms of this engine and the performance, and that is a fast acceleration. It's not just my gut feel, the number tells the whole story, because 60 miles per hour can be reached in just over 6 seconds, which is ridiculously fast for a large SUV like this. There's not too many models that can go to 60 that quickly, and it does it with absolutely no hesitation. It's smooth and just a beautiful engine, actually, from my perspective. So I really like the acceleration and the performance of this engine, which is perhaps the most important thing about this transformation from Highlander to Grand Highlander. Since this car is so big and we're all worried about whether or not the 2.4 turbo can handle the weight and the size of this new Grand Highlander. Thanks to the 362 horsepower engine, it does accelerate really well. But the seventh important point for me in terms of why this is a great SUV, especially a large SUV, is the surprisingly agile handling. I was taken back a little bit because I was expecting this car to be kind of floaty and soft, and a little bit more of a kind of classic 3-row large SUV feel. But no, that's not the case at all. They've actually tuned the suspension, the steering feel, and the calibration of ride and handling so that it mimics more of a sporty SUV. Granted, it's not quite as sporty as the Mazda CX-90. I think that car still gets my nod as the sportiest and most fun to drive. But this one is not too far behind, and Grand Highlander, I think, has a better ride and better overall refinement than the CX-90. So they both have their strengths and weaknesses. But just in terms of the overall feel of the handling, of the cornering, the stability, and the overall agility, you know what? This is the best 3-row SUV in terms of that balance within the Toyota or Lexus lineup. It does a really good job, and I'm just thankful that Toyota spent the extra time to get it right, because that was my biggest concern, that the Grand Highlander will just be too big and too soft and boring to drive. But that isn't the case. Now, once again, it's not a sporty SUV by any means, but in terms of having the right balance between agility, decent cornering, and also decent feedback in terms of steering feel and overall refinement, this one is really hard to beat and is better than any other 3-row SUV within Toyota or Lexus lineup. The eighth point I want to talk about is interior, and this is a huge design change from the normal Highlander, the Grand Highlander, and even when you compare this to other 3-row SUV within the Toyota lineups, including the 4RUNNER and the Sequoia, this is the best interior design. It's modern, clean, well designed, well engineered, and it doesn't look too upscale, but it is still quite beautiful inside. For example, we have a good combination and a mixture of different materials, including this kind of beige color material, contrasting with a darker color. Really good stitching in terms of quality of manufacturing. But you also get this nice bronze color, which is something that Toyota has been doing for a number of different models. You get bronze here, bronze accent here, which is a bit hard to see just because it's contrasting against the beige background here. But the overall look is, again, modern, looks clean, and thankfully we have buttons for everything. The temperature controls, the radio, all the controls over here as well, plus the normal controls on the steering as well. So ergonomically, this is a really good design. I'm just thankful that they didn't remove all these buttons and put it into the infotainment system like they have done on other Lexus models. So in terms of the interior design, in terms of quality of manufacturing and overall feel, this is definitely better than the other 3-row SUVs within Toyota. I even like this kind of almost geometric shape trims on the door and along the dash here. It's not carbon fiber, but kind of like a carbon fiber style of material, and looks really cool. So I think this is one of the best interpretations of a modern SUV interior with a very usable 12.3 inches infotainment system. The ninth point I want to talk about is the practicality of this interior. So not just the look and feel, but also in terms of how practical it is. So for example, the center console here is something a little bit different from others. You don't have to flip open, you actually slide open, which makes it easier. But look at the spacing inside. It is big enough that I can put like a small backpack in here, or camera equipment, or even a laptop. And this is a very unique to Grand Highlander. We don't have this in any other three-row SUVs within the Toyota lineup. And even the cup holders are nice and big and bulky, and you get one deep one here and two normal size one here, and more cup holders here and more cup holders on the other side as well. But this is also big enough. The map pocket area on the door is big enough. You can put a small bag in there as well. So you get lots of practical features added on top of a beautiful design, and that's why the interior is definitely better than all the other SUVs within the Toyota lineup. The 10th reason why this SUV is the most practical and the most desirable SUV is the fact that the third row is actually usable. Yes, it's not quite as big as those three-row SUVs you get from General Motors, for example. Those are gigantic, like the Denalis and Escalade and so forth. But this is pretty good. I have sufficient legroom space. I'm not really tall, but I get enough space. I get sufficient headroom, not a lot, but usable still. And most of all, the seats are actually quite comfortable. It's not super long this way, but it's more than sufficient for short and mid-distance trips. It's totally no problem at all. And you also get other features such as ability to recline this further. So if I'm willing to sacrifice the rear cargo space, I can recline even more here and almost get a kind of limousine feel. And then you get big cup holders here, lots of storage, both sides. My own dedicated USB port as well, and so forth. So for a third row SUV, this is probably the best iterations. We look at the 4RUNNER or the normal Highlander, the third row is not very usable. It's there, but it's not very practical. And Sequoia, as you know, has also sacrificed some of the practicality due to the battery underneath and so forth. And this one, being a unitized body, I think has the best application of what the three-row should be. And it's very usable and it's reasonably comfortable. The 11th point is somewhat subjective, but it's to do with the styling. I don't know about you, but I actually think this is a way better looking than the normal Highlander because that one has a bit of an awkward design. The normal Highlander has kind of big bump in the back here that comes up like this. It's supposed to look like kind of like a shoulder, but it looks like a minivan, to be honest. This one looks more blocky, a little bit more rugged looking. And in fact, it's one of the best looking SUVs within Toyota and Lexus lineup. In fact, it's one of the best looking SUV period because it's clean, simple, modern. And even though the front design borrows some design cues from the RAV4, the final design looks really good because it doesn't look like anything else within Toyota, and yet it looks modern. Even the back, it looks good. It has a bit of a Sequoia look in the back with the horizontal tail lamps. And once again, simple and modern and not overly done. And because it is a wider, longer, taller version of the Highlander, the entire proportion just looks better, from my opinion anyway. What do you guys think of the design and styling of the new Grand Highlander, especially compared to the older design 4RUNNER or newer body-on-frame vehicle like the Sequoia? They all share some design theme, but I think this is one of the most modern looking SUV. Let me know in the comments below if you like the styling or not. So 12th point that I want to talk about is really my conclusion about this vehicle and why I think this is better than any other three-row SUVs within Toyota, maybe even within Lexus, because right now the choices are somewhat limited. You have the old aged Toyota 4RUNNER, which is a beautiful vehicle to own, but somewhat awkward and very outdated. Then you have the normal Highlander, which is a little bit smaller than this. It doesn't perform as well as the Grand Highlander. So for a slight difference in price range, it's definitely worth upgrading to Grand Highlander. And you have the Sequoia, which I think is a beautiful truck, but it is big and bulky and not all that practical because of the big battery in the back. And also the handling and the ride is not all that great. It's a little bit rough and a little bit bumpy, even though I do like the engine a lot. So overall, when you look at the practicality, the value for money, what you get for this money, the Grand Highlander is really hard to beat. And because the manufacturing quality is almost at a Lexus level or maybe even matching the Lexus level, you are basically getting a big SUV that is almost at a Lexus level but at a Toyota pricing. And that's something that's really hard to achieve, and Toyota did that with the Grand Highlander. Now you might be wondering, do I still prefer the Mazda CX-90 over the Grand Highlander? Because I talked about that in the past. Well, it depends on what you're looking for. There's no question that the Mazda CX-90 handles better, it's more fun to drive, a little bit more agile, but overall practicality is better in the Grand Highlander. So which one you pick depends on which one you like and what's important to you. If I want the best handling three-row SUV, it is still the Mazda CX-90. But if I want the most practical one with a good quality and lots of features, then the Grand Highlander is a better choice. Let me know in the comments below what you think of the Grand Highlander compared to other models. But until next video, I'm going to sign off for now. In the meantime, if you can give me a thumbs up and then make some comments and then subscribe, that would be truly appreciated. Thank you so much, and until next video, I'm signing off for now.